So let's get started. I'm going to start by introducing myself. So my name's Juliana. Nishnakas Memengwan, so Abazishi Dodem, Nishnakas Nipsing Donshaba, Ottawa Nindonji. So my name's Juliana Grant. I'm from Nipsing First Nation, and I'll be your moderator, your youth moderator today for the session. So we have the breakout room discussion on Indigenous sovereignty. The purpose of this breakout room is to provide an opportunity for young people to discuss their experiences and recommendations for action with the UN Special Rapporteur on Indigenous Rights. Together, we want to co-create a space that makes you feel safe, where all participants feel like they belong, regardless of their experiences, orientation, gender, ethnicity, abilities, background, etc. Perfect. So we're so pleased today to be joined by the UN Special Rapporteur on Indigenous Rights, Francisco Cali Tassé. Mr. Tassé is Maya Kakshi Shell from Guatemala. He is a human rights lawyer and member of different Indigenous organizations in Guatemala. He has served as the ambassador for Guatemala to Germany and as president of the UN Committee for the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. He was appointed as the Special Rapporteur on Indigenous Rights earlier this year. Welcome, Mr. Tassé. Could you start by telling us a bit more about yourself and why you decided to spend National Child Day with us?
Well, thank you very much, Juliana. I just wanted to thank also to UNICEF Canada, the Assembly of Seventh Generations, and of course the youth of Canada to allow me to be with you today. And of course, congratulate all the Native people of Canada, because I think that that is why you are gathering today. Because I believe that there is a very important day today, especially in Canada, the National Child Day that is celebrated in Canada today. So I think that I just wanted to congratulate also UNICEF for doing this today. And I just, I'm not going to lie to you that I read all the documents that UNICEF sent me yesterday, because I read it, and I am very pleased to say that I am very happy to see that there are experiences that have been shared among yourself, and that you are very clear about what you are trying to do. And that is something that we had done in Guatemala. And I've been member of the indigenous movement in Guatemala since I was 12, 13 years old. I used to live in Vancouver, BC, from 1981 to 1987, because my political involvement on the indigenous movement. I was forced by the military from Guatemala to leave my country. They accused me to be a communist, and I didn't know what communism was until I got to Canada. You know that in Latin America and the country that is south of you, now they are using the same excuse again, just to disqualify all the people who are against them. And that is something that I was accused, so I went to Canada as a refugee. Only 2 Guatemalans we were recognized as political refugees, with a case in Toronto and one in Vancouver. That was myself. Canada started the humanitarian policy to receive Central Americans you are not old enough to remember that. Even sometimes some of you have not born those days, so that was very difficult times. And because of that, when I received the invitation, of course, I was very happy because Canada is one of the countries that I know, because I traveled from the Vancouver Island to what is the other island in the Atlantic? I don't remember this moment. So I traveled almost all Canada. I know all BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, Newfoundland. So I've been traveling almost everywhere in Canada in those 7 years, talking about the situation of the indigenous people in Guatemala. So when I received the invitation from UNICEF, I said, "Oh, that is a very good opportunity, not only to share my experience with you, but to learn how you are doing, what are you doing today." And what I learned from the document that I received from UNICEF yesterday is that you have been doing a very good work, and even you are very clear on choosing your issue, not what UNICEF told you that you have to talk about reconciliation. And you said, no, reconciliation is something that, of course, is a very important for us, but from the 100 recommendations that it came out from this process of reconciliation, only 10 have been approached. And I think that that is very important because you are very clear on the basis of what sovereignty has to be based in its land and territories. So I think that that is something that called my attention, and I am very happy to be with you. But also I am very honored because on those days in the 80s, I was surprised that many indigenous youth, they were not interested on the political movement of the national movement in Canada. And if you talk about the youth in general in Canada, I was amazing because I was 19 when I was a refugee in Canada. And youth on my age, they didn't care about the situation of what the situation that they were living. So now I'm very proud to say that I'm very honored to say this, that I am very happy to be with you. And that's why it's not that I knew that, but something told me inside myself that I have to be with you. And that's why I wanted to thank again UNICEF Canada for the invitation. And of course, I will not teach you anything. I will learn from you because you have many things to share with me and to tell me what is going on in Canada. Just I wanted to tell you that I participated as one honoring witness of the process of reconciliation in Canada. So I know a little bit about what's happening there, and and I know something about Canada. So that's why I'm very happy to be with you, and thank you again.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tsay, for that information. I think we're going to move on to our facilitated conversation between youth participants and decision makers. So Sam, did you want to start with some questions?
Yeah, I definitely can. Sorry, I forgot the mic. Yeah, the first thing I wanted to ask you is, what are some of the positive outcomes from countries that have implemented UNDRIP so far? It's a bit broad, but just some of the kind of best things that you've seen, maybe.
Sorry that I didn't hear you well. What is the last thing that you say? Involvement of?
No, for countries that have implemented UNDRIP,
Okay,
what
okay.
are some of the best outcomes? Yeah, so far.
The thing is that we have, I don't used to use UNDRIP because we in internationally we said that we are not going to use UNDRIP because United Nations used to just to trying to just not to call what really is the name of the declaration, and that's why I am not used to hear UNDRIP. So, but anyway. Look, even the United States in this moment, probably you hear about that, but about 2 years, no, I'm sorry, 2 months ago, the Federal Court of Oklahoma State declared that the treaties between the Cree. Oh, I forgot the name of the tribe, but there is one of tribe. I know that it's a Cree also. Has the right of territory and land in Oklahoma. And that because the treaty that they signed between their people and the United States had been not expired because the treaties have not been denounced for any of the parts. So that's why, and based on the UN Declaration of Indigenous Peoples' Rights, they decide that they have to give back the land to the Cree people in Oklahoma. And also in Belize, the Supreme Court of Belize, based on the United Nations Declaration on the Indigenous Peoples' Rights, they had give also, or they have recognized the traditional land of the Mayan people of Belize. In Bolivia, they took all the UN declaration and they put it as a law in Bolivia, as a national law. And if we continue with that, we will see that in Peru, Ecuador, and also in Colombia, they have been also using the United Nations Declaration on the Indigenous Peoples' Rights as a base of legal defense of the Indigenous peoples' right on land and territories. Of course, there are many way, or it's a long way to go to see accomplish the UN declaration, but still there are some countries, especially Latin American countries, who have been used the UN declaration. And if we go also to the organization of the American States, the Commission on the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, and also the Inter-American Court, they have been used also the UN Declaration as a base to respect the human rights of the indigenous peoples. So there are many examples that have been come through after the declaration. And I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that definitely does. Do you think you could possibly speak to some of the, I guess, even though these countries have maybe started to implement UNDRIP into their policies in their own countries, what are the challenges these countries still face in implementing it?
Transnationals, especially from Canada. So that is something that as you know, that I was member also for 16 years. I was a member of the Committee for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. We, in I think twice or three times, we recommended to Canada to respect their own law, the Canadian law, on the behaving of the transnational in I don't know how to translate that in English, but it's like overseas activities of their transnational, especially on minerals extractions, because the Canadian mining companies are the ones who are violating the human right of the indigenous people almost all over Latin America. A good example is Canada. I'm sorry, is Guatemala. As you know, there is a legal case of Guatemala in Montreal in this moment because the Guatemalan court, they are not strong enough, and they don't have a political will to apply the national law. So the Kekchi Mayan people decide to bring to justice in the Canadian court, and that's why there is a case in Montreal in this moment. So, as I said, it's transnationals. Of course, the weakness of the national law of these countries. In Bolivia, I think that there is going to be a difference today. There is more political willingness of respecting indigenous people's rights. But of course, that from the speech to the reality is something that you have to walk long distance. But I'm hoping that in Bolivia will be in a better situation in this moment. In Peru, they are not willing. They are not a political will to accomplish the United Nations Declaration on Indigenous Peoples' Rights. Why? Because there are many economical interests. Especially, I think that they are defending the economical interests of transnationals in almost all Latin America. And that is one of the problems that they are going to face.
Awesome. Thank you for that. That was definitely some really good information, and I'll definitely look into that further. Another question is, how is the UN holding countries accountable who haven't implemented UNDRIP?
Unfortunately, indigenous people got inside, I believe personally, in a negative discussion. And in the discussion, if it's if the United Nations Declaration of Indigenous Peoples' Rights is a binding instrument. Legally, in the point of view of lawyers mainly, any declaration doesn't have any binding, we can say any binding to the states, because it's a declaration of a good willing of the states. But I have been telling them, especially lawyers, that and not especially, but to the indigenous peoples, I've been telling them that in the international law, customary law is the resource of the right, or the resource of law. And that's why I've been asking indigenous people to use the United Nations Declaration, because in the way that we are going to use is going to be a custom, international custom, and it's going to be a customary law that will be enforced the United Nations Declaration of Indigenous Peoples' Rights to be binding to those countries. For example, I put the example that no state today is arguing against the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. None of them. Why? Because everybody is using the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So that's why I am asking the indigenous peoples to use the declaration as a base on their legal argument. So in that way, we are going to force that the United Nations Declaration on Indigenous Peoples' Rights be binding to all states. But that is something that I believe that it is going to take place until we, the indigenous people, got the idea that we have to do it. if we are not going to use the declaration and we are going to continue in the discussion that the declaration is not a binding instrument, I believe that never is going to be binding for any state.
Sweet, that was awesome. I guess we were wondering too, like I learned in one of my classes that the 4 settler colonial states of Canada, US, Australia, and New Zealand haven't adopted the declaration. And do you think you could speak to why that is?
The United States argument is that the U.S. Constitution is more advanced than the UN Declaration, and that is the argument that they are going. They used to use in all instruments, all human rights instruments. They said no, our Constitution is better, so we are going to respect our Constitution. And Canada, you know that Canada always follow the US, and Australia and New Zealand are doing the same thing. Fortunately, also the United States and Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, they change governments. So when they change government, they decide to support the UN Declaration. So in this moment, there are not any country who is against the UN Declaration. That's why we can say in this moment that the United Nations Declaration on Indigenous Peoples' Rights is a universal declaration. But to force the to force the declaration to be binding, we have to use it. If we don't use, it's a waste of time.
Great, thank you. Sam, did you have any other questions you wanted to add, or was that about it for your questions?
I just have one other one, and it's if we had concerns as Indigenous youth from Canada and we wanted to bring them to the UN, what would that process look like?
It depends on what issue you want to bring to United Nations, because there are many mechanisms to bring issues on human rights. You have to know that there are 56 special procedures or 56 special rapporteurs, and there are 10 committees on human rights. So from the Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights Committee to the Committee of the Elimination of Against Racial Discrimination. Is the Committee for the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, the Committee for the Rights of the Child, the Committee for the Rights of the Migrant and Relatives. So there are 10 committees. So you have 66 mechanisms where you can present your issues, but you have to know exactly which issue you want to present. And in that way, you are going to be clear to what mechanism you want to present.
So one of the things we've talked about is RCMP, which are like the police force.
Yes, I know the RCMP.
You know RCMP, yeah. Like if we wanted to bring RCMP and try to like in state policy in Canada to remove RCMP completely, what like kind of avenue would it be through, like UNDRIP then? Or sorry, Universal Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
No. It's okay. That is something that you have to use your own law. You are a sovereign nation. You have your own police, tribe police, and I think that sometimes people believe that United Nations is the solution of all our problems, and sometimes the solution is just in front of us. I think that what we need to do is to see what solution we can get inside our country. And if we can support it with the international mechanism, it's very good, but we have to find those solutions inside our countries. United Nations is not going to solve all our problems. It doesn't have, sometimes doesn't have the power to do it. Many people, for example, in Colombia, I remember that there were some people that were asking me, hey, you are the special rapporteur, why you are not coming here? You order the police, you order the paramilitary to say, to stop their activities. Or what else, or what is the other solution that you can give to us? Because we are dying. Of course, they are dying there. There is an urgent situation that it has to be resolved in Colombia because they are killing indigenous people. Even the peace agreement was signed. And I told them, I don't have the power to go to Colombia and say, stop this and stop this and stop this. The only body of United Nations that can do that is the peace forces. But to get peace forces to Colombia or to anywhere has to be a resolution from the Security Council. And the Security Council are only, if I am not wrong, there are 8 members, states who are members of the Security Council, 5 permanent members, and 3 who are just for 2 or 3 years, who are members of the Peace Council, or the Council, Security Council. I mean. So that's why I'm telling you, look, what you have to do is to see legally what you can ask the government of Canada with your law in Canada. And of course, with all the agreement that you have been signed or your people signed in the treaties, because there are treaties that have been signed in the past between the tribes and the Canadian government or the Crown. Even those treaties that were signed between the tribes and the Crown is still valid in this moment. So you have to see all those issues, legal issues there. And then you have to go and to see what instrument, international instrument can support your petition, and you can support that legally. But I will suggest that you have to see all those issues inside Canada in the beginning as a first step.
Awesome. Yeah, I really appreciate that. I think that's all the questions I had. So Juliana, did you want to ask some of the ones that you prepared?
Yeah, for sure. So, the question I had for Mr. Tassé was how we can draw more attention to police brutality against Indigenous people in Canada, and how and or if this has been done in other countries, like in your experience, and what has like worked well.
Yeah, you know that in Canada, especially police brutality, it has been came into the Committee for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination because the brutality that the police are using, especially, is against minorities or against indigenous peoples. And that is based on the so-called believing that there is a racial superiority, or as a race that is a superior of the other ones. And I don't know if you remember about 2 or 3 years ago about the police brutality in the US. The committee had done a very good work, especially asking United States to stop that police brutality, especially against Afro Americans. So I think that that is something that you have to see in that way. You have to study the International Convention of the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, and to see how this can help you to denounce the police brutality in Canada. And I am worried especially on police brutality against women, because that is something that is taking place, especially in Alberta and if I'm not wrong, in Manitoba. So that is something that worries me. And of course, if that can help you, if you can send also a communication to the special rapporteur, which is, of course, is me in this moment, but you can send it to me and you can explain what really is happening, and we can communicate officially to the Canadian government.
Wow, thank you for that. Yeah, I wrote some of that down, and I'm definitely gonna have to think about it a lot more. So thank you for that information. Next, I think Ganabot had a few questions he was gonna ask.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So hi, my name is Ganabot. So the first question I'd ask is a little less on the quote unquote legal side. And it's more just that obviously Canada's in a pretty interesting place right now, having both just gone through decades of Indigenous resurgence in terms of culture and just communities and people coming back up together. And now we're seeing not necessarily a resurgence, but we're seeing the creation of this land back movement. We're seeing Indigenous people stand together and rise up together, and we're asking things of the government. So in your experience, what other examples of this type of resurgence and development of actions and cultures has taken place in other countries, and how has that gone from an international perspective?
Well, I think that there are the same issues that you are just raising in Canada. The difference is that you are, in a way, you are Juliana and I think Samuel was mentioning about the police the brutality and all the, we can say, persecution or repression that is against Indigenous peoples, but they are not on the same situation. You are not in the same situation that the third world countries, where they are repression, they are persecution, they are killing, they are taking place massacres. Of course, massacres took place in Canada 100 years ago, but in third world countries are still taking place those issues in this moment. And the police intelligence, they are controlling most of the movement that is taking place. And if you are raising those issues, your life is in danger. So in Canada, still you have, we can say, a democratic mechanism that you can defend yourselves. But the thing is that, for example, in Latin America, one of the issues that is raising in this moment, the indigenous movement, is the protection of Mother Earth, especially because the climate change environment, the biodiversity that has been loose in many of the countries, in the third world countries. You can imagine, and that is something that I was amazing. This morning I was watching a TV show in Guatemala, and one of the former Minister of Interior was explaining that the natural catastrophes that is taking place in Guatemala is the fault of indigenous peoples, because they are deforesting those areas. But the thing is that when we are talking about deforestation from indigenous people, is because you go 1 year, and 1 year you cut one tree and you use for fire, for fire for cooking. But they are not taking in account the big transnational who have been deforesting almost all the forests where those natural catastrophes took place in these two storms. Why? Because they are willing or they are interested to plant the so-called African palm to get the oil. So that is something that is not is not, they are not taking an account. They are blaming indigenous people, that they are their own responsible of what is happening to them. So blaming other people is because they wanted to hide the reality in there. And when you start to denounce all those issues, for example, there are two people who have been on jail for 4 years and they have not been here. What are the what of why they are on jail? What is the accusation that they had to be on jail? In jail. So I think that the thing is that the justice, the system of justice in third world countries like Guatemala is against indigenous peoples and is in favor of the transnationals. So that's why I think that there are the same issues that you are raising. The only difference is the system that you have. The system of justice, even that I know in some cases the judges are against indigenous people, but in some other cases, for example, in British Columbia, the situation of indigenous people are getting not better, but 100%, but still they are getting better situation there in British Columbia. So the thing is that if you wanted to compare, is that are the same issues. The only difference is the situation, the political situation that they are living indigenous people.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's always really interesting hearing a different perspective, because a lot of times when we have that conversation, we don't get that international insight and we don't really have a way to place our own situation within, like on a scale, essentially. I think that wraps up for that question. So I'm going to toss it back to Juliana.
Perfect. So I'm just going to go ahead and ask if anyone in the audience had any questions that they wanted to ask.
Yeah, I have a question. So Ani Bojo Tanchekiwao. So my name is Gabrielle Fayant. I'm one of the co-founders and co-CEOs of Assembly of Seven Generations. And so, yeah, like I'm not a youth anymore. I've like kind of like grown out of that. And so, but in my experience as a young person, I've been involved in like a few like federal reports and roadmaps, and I've also gone to the UN. Wow, I can't even think of the name right now, but I've gone to the UN for the Indigenous Peoples Forum, and so it was like a really interesting experience. And what I found is that Canada kind of pays for Indigenous people that they work closely with to kind of support their claims that, you know, everything's fine in Canada. There's nothing to worry about in Canada in regards to Indigenous rights. And I saw that it was really challenging for grassroots groups as well as youth to really get their voice heard, to even like speak to the right people. And so I was just wondering if you had any recommendations about like how we could better position ourselves so that it's not the government of Canada that's speaking on behalf of Indigenous peoples at these forums. So yeah, that's my question.
Well, probably today, and in some time, that happening what you had said, but in one time I remember that Canada was against of all indigenous peoples, and they were blaming indigenous people for everything. What I can recommend is that we have to take advantage of that, of those positions, and asking the government to be coherent with with their international speech and with the reality that we are living. So I think that that is something that we have to see, and I think that that Canada in this moment, for example, Canada government is the ones who are giving or they are financing democratic processes in Latin America and participation of indigenous people on those democratic processes. So I think that what really is needed is that you, as a native from Canada, start to ask them that coherence between their international behavior and the internal behavior that they are doing with indigenous people in Canada. So, but that is something that you have to do it. And if you want our support, you have to send a report to us explaining the reality that indigenous people in Canada are living. Because we are going to follow only the public information that we had. And if we don't receive any report, any information from Canada, we cannot do anything. We cannot communicate with them. The Committee for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, they have been done a big pressure to Canada, especially on the gas pipe in British Columbia. I know that they have not stopped, but they know that there is international pressure that is there, and they have to respect indigenous people's rights, especially on the right of their land and territory. So, and I remember also the Tarzan's issue. There was also a very big issue, and Canada knew that the international community was aware of that, and they were looking at those issues. So that is what I'm doing now is giving you those two examples, because if you send in report, you send information, you are going to be more seen internationally.
Cool. Yeah, that helps a lot. I think that, you know, Indigenous folks, like, especially in the last fall or winter and spring, like we, you know, we really took a stand about what was happening in Wet'suwet'en territory. And I think that that influenced a lot of what happened at the UN, especially like the UN Security Council. And so, yeah, I think we do have like a really big role to play. And you're right, like we gotta just like get to work on some of them and use those mechanisms. So miigwech, hi hi.
Hi, hi.
Did anybody else want to ask a question that's in the audience? No, you guys are good?
Can I ask a question? I don't want to take any space from the young people, but if it's okay, I'd like to ask one. So hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Wolf. I'm with UNICEF Canada, and I'm joining you today from the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the New Credit. I had a question about the legal adoption of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And Jose, in Canada, there's been you know, some indication that the federal government would move forward with legislation, that in BC, the British Columbia government. But the approach that they're taking is to put in legislation that the government will work to comply with the provisions of the declaration, not that they will come into legal force in the law. And I just wonder what you think about that distinction.
For me, it's a formality, because if they wanted to accomplish what the United Nations Declaration is said, even that it's not having legal enforcement, as they are trying to say, international, they have to accomplish anyway. Because, and as I always said, when you see the United Nations Declaration of Indigenous Peoples' Rights individually, probably it's not going to have the force enough to force a state to not only to accomplish, but to enforce the legally the declaration. So that's why in the United Nations there is a view that that human right is only one body. If we are going to analyze the United Nations Declaration of Indigenous Peoples' Rights in a transversal way, and link it to all the international human rights instruments, is when it's going to have enough force to force a state to enforce the United Nations Declaration. Because that is something that you don't have to allow lawyers or government to say that they are going to analyze only the United Nations Declaration by itself, individually, isolated from the rest of the human right instrument on human rights. So if we are going to see as only one body, the human rights instrument of the United Nations, you will see the legal force that the human rights instrument had in Canada. So you know that a law in Canada, US, or anywhere else, it depends on the interpretation. And if you have a very good lawyer that is going to interpreting that law that they are just trying to fulfill the United Nations Declaration, you will see that it's not going to take place that. You will see that that law is an enforcement law to accomplish the United Nations Declaration in British Columbia. So it's depending on what is the interpretation and the lawyer that is going to defend or is going to be against indigenous peoples.
Did anybody have any last questions? All right, so I'll wrap things up just by saying thank you to everyone who's participating today. These conversations are so important to have, and I'm really grateful to be here today to listen in to all of you. So yeah, big thank you to Mr. Tassé for joining us today. It means a lot to the youth. Yeah, it means a lot to us. So Chimigwich for that. And thanks to everybody behind the scenes supporting us.
Oh, thank you very much. And you know that I am here to support the youth in Canada. So please, to UNICEF Canada, please feel free to contact me through the secretariat or through my email. I will be very happy to support your work.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All
Thank you very
right.
much.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.